The blood from Myles Sinclair's wound had long since dried on his saddle as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the jagged mountains of the Colorado Territory. It was the summer of 1873, and the unforgiving frontier had claimed yet another victim, though this time death would have to wait its turn. Tessa Pearson saw the stranger fall from his horse just beyond her property line. She had been tending her small garden outside the modest cabin her father had built before the consumption took him 3 winters ago. At 22, she had grown accustomed to the solitude of her life, 10 miles outside of Florissant, Colorado. The isolation suited her just fine until today. "Hold on, mister," she called out, dropping her garden tools and rushing toward the fallen rider. His horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, nervously pawed the ground nearby, clearly distressed by its master's condition. The man's face was caked with trail dust and dried blood. A bullet wound in his side had soaked his shirt crimson. His breathing was shallow, each rise and fall of his chest a labored effort. Despite his condition, Tessa noticed his strong jawline, weather beaten but handsome, and his sturdy build, the kind that came from years of hard living. "Can you hear me?" Tessa asked, kneeling beside him. His eyelids fluttered, revealing deep blue eyes clouded with pain. "Horse," he managed to whisper before losing consciousness again. Tessa whistled softly, approaching the nervous stallion with her palm outstretched. "Easy there, boy. I need your help to save your master." The horse calmed under her touch, allowing Tessa to grab the reins. With considerable effort, she managed to drag the unconscious man onto a makeshift travois she hastily constructed from fallen pine branches and rope from his saddle bags. The journey back to her cabin was arduous, but the stallion proved as strong as it was loyal, helping her transport its wounded master. Inside her cabin, Tessa cleared her small dining table and heaved the man onto it. She cut away his blood-soaked shirt with shears, revealing not only the fresh bullet wound but a tapestry of old scars that told stories of a hard life lived. She worked methodically, the way her father had taught her, cleaning the wound with whiskey, extracting the bullet with tweezers heated in the fire, and stitching the hole closed with catgut thread. Night had fully descended by the time she finished. With great effort, she managed to move the man to her bed. She built up the fire, its warm glow casting dancing shadows across the wounded stranger's face. His fever had set in, and she placed a cool cloth on his forehead, preparing for what would likely be a long vigil. "Who are you?" she whispered, searching his pockets for identification. She found nothing except a worn photograph of a smiling woman holding a baby, and a wanted poster not for him, but for a man named Jasper Knox, wanted for murder and robbery of the Florissant Bank. The reward was substantial, $500 dead or alive. As the night deepened, the man's fever worsened. He thrashed and mumbled incoherently, occasionally crying out names Sarah, Thomas, people from a past Tessa could only guess at. She continued to bathe his forehead with cool water, whispering soothing words as she would to a frightened colt. Near dawn, when the fire had burned down to embers, his eyes opened with surprising clarity. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice raspy from thirst. "My cabin," Tessa replied, offering him water. "Near Florissant, you were shot." He drank greedily before speaking again. "Name's Myles Sinclair." "Tessa Pearson," she replied. "You should rest, Mr. Sinclair. You lost a lot of blood." His eyes were already closing again, the brief moment of consciousness fading. "My horse. He's fine, in the lean-to outside." Relief washed over his face. "Thank you," he whispered. Then, as sleep reclaimed him, Tessa pulled her rocking chair closer to the bed. "I'll watch till you wake," she said softly. though she wasn't sure he could hear her anymore. For 3 days, Myles drifted between consciousness and fevered dreams. Tessa barely left his side, tending to his wound, forcing broth between his lips when he was lucid enough to swallow, and changing the bedding when his fever broke and left him soaked in sweat. She slept in short bursts, always in the chair beside him, true to her word. On the 4th morning she awoke to find him watching her, his blue eyes clear and alert. "You've been here the whole time," he said. It wasn't a question. Tessa straightened in her chair, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. "I said I would watch till you wake." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I reckon I'm finally awake. How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a buffalo herd, then shot for good measure." He attempted to sit up, wincing at the pain. "Easy," Tessa cautioned, helping him. "The bullet missed anything vital, but you'll tear my stitching if you move too quickly." Myles looked around the cabin, taking in the simple but well-kept home. "You live here alone?" "Since my father passed 3 years ago." He nodded, understanding the unspoken story of frontier hardship. "It's dangerous for a woman alone." "Perhaps," Tessa acknowledged, "but I manage. The nearest neighbor is 4 miles away, the Wilsons. They check on me when they can." She busied herself preparing a more substantial meal than broth. "You hungry?" "Starving," Myles admitted. As Tessa cooked, Myles attempted to piece together the events leading to his injury. "I was tracking a man, Jasper Knox. He robbed the Florissant Bank, killed 2 people in the process. I was a deputy marshal out of Denver." Tessa paused her cooking. "Was." "Badge doesn't mean much when you're bleeding out alone in the wilderness," he said with a wry smile. "But yes, still am, I suppose." "I found the wanted poster," Tessa admitted, bringing him a plate of beans and cornbread. $500 is a lot of money. Knox is a dangerous man. Worth every penny to see him brought to justice." Myles ate slowly, savoring real food after days of broth. "I tracked him for 2 weeks before he ambushed me in that ravine about a mile from here, shot me and left me for dead." "Any idea where he was headed?" Myles shook his head. "West, maybe to the mining camps around Cripple Creek, or south toward New Mexico territory. Hard to say." They ate in companionable silence, the crackle of the fire and the occasional whinny from the horses outside the only sounds. Tessa found herself studying the deputy marshal, his strong hands, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his neck, the lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun and maybe even laughter in better times. "Thank you," he said suddenly, setting down his empty plate. "For saving my life." Tessa felt a blush creeping up her neck. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Myles said firmly. "Most would have left me where I fell, or worse, finished the job and collected the reward themselves, claiming Knox had done it." The brutal honesty of frontier justice hung between them, acknowledged but not dwelled upon. "Well," Tessa said finally, "you're welcome to stay until you're healed enough to ride. I could use the company." Myles nodded, gratitude evident in his eyes. "I'd be obliged. Though I can't offer much in return except an extra gun if trouble comes." "In these parts, that's payment enough," Tessa replied with a small smile. The next week passed in a rhythm of healing and quiet companionship. Myles grew stronger each day, moving from the bed to a chair by the fire, then to short walks outside the cabin. Tessa found herself enjoying his presence, the deep timbre of his voice, as he told stories of his life as a lawman. The way he listened intently when she spoke of her father's dreams for their small homestead. The respectful distance he maintained despite their close quarters. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Myles finally asked the question that had been on his mind. "Your father built this place, but what about your mother? You never mention her." Tessa's hand stilled in her mending. She died when I was born. I never knew her. Pa raised me alone. That couldn't have been easy for either of you. Pa said I was worth it, Tessa said softly. He gave up a promising law practice in St. Louis to bring Mother west when her consumption worsened. The doctor said the mountain air might help her. I'm sorry it didn't. So am I. Tessa resumed her sewing. But Pa never regretted it, even when he caught the same disease that took her. He loved this land, said it had a way of stripping a person down to what truly matters. Myles nodded thoughtfully. Wise man, your father. What about your family? Tessa asked. A shadow crossed Myles's face. Lost them. My wife Sarah and our son Thomas, 5 years ago. Tessa waited, sensing there was more to the story. We had a small ranch in Kansas, Myles continued, his voice low. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. Men came one night, rustlers looking for easy pickings. I was in town getting supplies. His jaw tightened. By the time I got back, the house was burning. Sarah and Thomas were inside. Oh, Myles, Tessa whispered, her heart breaking for him. I tracked those men for 2 years, he said, staring into the fire. Found them one by one. After that, a friend convinced me to pin on a badge, use my skills for something besides vengeance. The weight of his loss hung heavy in the room. Tessa understood now why he pursued Knox with such determination. It wasn't just about justice, it was about purpose. The photograph, she said. The one in your pocket, that was them? Myles nodded, unable to speak. Without thinking, Tessa reached across and took his hand. They sat like that, connected by shared understanding of loss as the fire burned low. 2 days later, a spring storm descended on the mountains, bringing heavy rain that turned the trails to mud and kept them confined to the cabin. Myles had graduated to helping with chores, his side healing well under Tessa's care. The forced proximity in the small space should have been awkward, but instead, they fell into an easy domesticity that surprised them both. Myles proved handy with repairs. Tessa had been putting off fixing a leak in the roof, mending a broken chair, reinforcing the door hinges. Tessa found herself watching his hands as he worked, strong and capable, yet gentle when they needed to be. As thunder crashed outside, they sat at the table playing cards by lamplight. Tessa had just won her 3rd hand of poker when Myles laughed and leaned back in his chair. Where did a proper young lady learn to play cards like that? He asked, eyes twinkling with amusement. My father believed in a practical education, Tessa replied with a grin. He said knowing when to hold and when to fold was as valuable a lesson as any in the good book. Smart man. He teach you to shoot too, of course. I can hit a squirrel at 50 paces with Pa's Winchester. Remind me never to get on your bad side, Myles chuckled, then winced slightly as the movement pulled at his healing wound. You should rest, Tessa said, noticing his discomfort. I've rested enough. His eyes met hers across the table. Thanks to you, I'll be ready to ride soon. The thought of him leaving sent an unexpected pang through Tessa's heart. She had grown accustomed to his presence, to not being alone. What will you do? She asked. About Knox, I mean. Myles's expression hardened. Continue hunting him. He needs to answer for what he's done. Even if it gets you killed, it's my job, Tessa. She stood abruptly, gathering the cards. Well, you're not fit to do your job just yet, Marshal Sinclair. Not until I say so. A slow smile spread across his face. Yes, madam. The storm continued through the night and into the next day. They passed the time with stories and more card games. Myles taught Tessa a few tricks he'd learned from an old gambler in Dodge City, and she shared her mother's recipe for apple pie, made with dried apples she'd put up the previous fall. As evening approached on the 2nd day of the storm, the rain finally began to ease. They stood together in the doorway, watching as patches of blue appeared between the clouds. Should clear by morning, Myles observed. Tessa nodded, trying to ignore the heaviness in her chest. Morning meant trails dry enough to travel. It meant Myles would leave. "I should check on the horses," she said, stepping out onto the porch. The air was fresh and clean after the rain, the scent of pine and wet earth filling her lungs. She had just reached the lean-to when she heard the sound of approaching riders. Her hand instinctively moved to the pistol she kept in her apron pocket. 3 men appeared around the bend in the trail, their horses moving slowly through the mud. The leader, a bearded man with a scar running through his left eyebrow, spotted her and raised a hand in greeting. "Evening, miss," he called out. "Sorry to trouble you, but we've been caught in this storm for 2 days. Might we water our horses at your creek?" Something about the man's smile didn't reach his eyes. Tessa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. "Of course," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "The creek's just yonder." She turned to head back to the cabin when the man spoke again. "Mighty nice of you. Living out here all alone must be difficult." Tessa froze. She hadn't mentioned being alone. She glanced back at the men, noticing now the way they positioned themselves, one moving toward the back of her cabin, one staying on the trail as if watching for other arrivals. "It has its challenges," she said carefully, "but I manage with the help of my brother and his friends." They're inside now, resting after hunting all morning. The leader's eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking to the cabin. "Is that so?" Before he could say more, Myles appeared in the doorway, Tessa's father's rifle held casually but deliberately in his hands. "Everything all right, Tessa?" he called, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. The leader's posture changed immediately, tension rippling through him. "Just passing through," he said to Tessa, touching the brim of his hat. "Much obliged for the water." Tessa backed slowly toward the cabin, never taking her eyes off the strangers. When she reached Myles's side, she whispered, "Something's not right." "I know," he murmured. "Get inside." Tessa obeyed, but stayed by the window, watching as the men watered their horses, speaking in low voices and casting frequent glances toward the cabin. "You recognize them?" she asked when Myles joined her. He shook his head. "But the one with the scar, something about him seems familiar." As the men mounted up, the leader raised his voice. "Obliged for the hospitality, miss. Your father built a fine place here." Tessa felt the blood drain from her face. She hadn't mentioned her father either. The riders disappeared down the trail, but the unease remained. Myles secured the door with a chair wedged under the handle, then checked that all the windows were latched. "How did he know about my father?" Tessa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Myles admitted, "but they'll be back, maybe not tonight, but soon." "You think they're with Knox?" "Possibly, or just opportunists who spotted a woman living alone." His jaw tightened. "Either way, we'll be ready." They ate dinner in tense silence, both listening for sounds of the riders returning. Afterward, Myles cleaned and checked both his revolver and Tessa's father's rifle, placing them within easy reach. "You should get some sleep," he told her. "I'll take first watch." "I'm not sure I could sleep," Tessa admitted. "Try, I'll wake you in a few hours." Reluctantly, Tessa retreated to the bed, but sleep eluded her. She could hear Myles moving quietly around the cabin, checking the windows, adding wood to the fire. His presence should have been comforting, but her mind kept returning to the stranger's words and the cold calculation in his eyes. She must have dozed off eventually because she woke with a start to Myles's hand on her shoulder. "Tessa," he whispered urgently. "They're back." She was instantly alert, reaching for her shawl. "How many?" "Still 3, but they're splitting up. One circling behind the cabin." Tessa grabbed the pistol from under her pillow. "What do we do?" "We have the advantage. They don't know I recognize the threat." Myles's voice was calm, but his eyes were hard. "Stay low and away from the windows." They positioned themselves strategically miles near the door with the rifle, Tessa by the back window with her pistol. The night was quiet except for the occasional hoot of an owl and the soft nickering of the horses, sensing the tension. The attack, when it came, was swift. The front door crashed open as a shot blasted through the back window. Myles fired the rifle, his shot finding its mark in the chest of the man at the door. Tessa ducked as glass rained down, then steadied her pistol and fired at a shadow moving past the broken window. A cry of pain told her she'd hit her target, but the third man was already inside, knocking the rifle from Myles's hands. The two men grappled, crashing into the table. Tessa saw the flash of a knife and fired again, but missed in her haste. Myles, still not at full strength, was losing the fight. The attacker, the scarred leader, had him pinned, knife inching toward his throat. Without thinking, Tessa grabbed the cast iron skillet from the stove and brought it down hard on the back of the man's head. He slumped forward, unconscious. "Are you hurt?" She gasped, helping Myles push the man's weight off him. "Just winded," he assured her, though fresh blood stained his shirt where his wound had reopened. "Check outside, make sure the other one's down." Tessa peered cautiously out the broken window. The man she'd shot was sprawled in the dirt, not moving. The one Myles had hit lay halfway through the doorway, equally still. "They're down," she confirmed, her hands shaking as the reality of what had just happened washed over her. "Myles, who are they?" He was already binding the unconscious leader's hands with rope. "Let's find out." He searched the man's pockets, finding a folded paper that he opened and studied in the lamplight. His expression darkened. "What is it?" Tessa asked. "A wanted poster for you." "For me? That's impossible." Myles handed her the paper. It was similar to the one for Knox, but featured a crude sketch of a woman who vaguely resembled Tessa. The text identified her as Teresa Parker, wanted for theft and murder in Denver, with a reward of $300. "This is absurd," Tessa said, staring at the paper. "I'm not this woman. I've never even been to Denver." "I know," Myles said gently. "But they didn't. They were bounty hunters, not very good ones. Saw a woman alone who matched a vague description and thought they'd found easy money." Relief flooded through Tessa, followed quickly by horror as she looked at the bodies. "We killed two men over a mistake. They were going to kill us," Myles reminded her. "Or worse. This wasn't a mistake, it was self-defense." The bound man on the floor began to stir, groaning. Myles knelt beside him, grasping his collar. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The man blinked groggily, then focused on Myles's face. Recognition dawned in his eyes. "You're supposed to be dead." "Sorry to disappoint. Answer the question." "Nobody sent us. Saw the poster in Colorado Springs. Thought we'd try our luck." "The woman in that poster isn't her," Myles said, his voice dangerously low. "Doesn't matter now, does it?" The man grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "You've killed my brothers. Reckon that makes us even." Myles glanced at Tessa, then back at the prisoner. "We'll take you to the sheriff in Florissant in the morning. Let him sort this out." The man laughed. "You do that, Marshal. Be interesting to see who hangs me or her." Dawn broke clear and cold after the storm. Tessa had barely slept, her mind replaying the previous night's events. She had killed a man, mistake or not. The weight of that knowledge sat heavy on her soul. Myles had bound their prisoner securely and kept watch through the night. Now, as sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, they faced the grim task of dealing with the dead men and planning their journey to Florissant. "We should bury them," Tessa said, looking at the bodies they had moved away from the cabin. "It's the decent thing to do." Myles nodded, though his expression suggested he thought the men deserved less consideration. "There's a shovel in the lean-to. I'll dig graves while you pack what you need." "Pack? I'm not leaving." "Tessa," Myles said gently, "it's not safe here anymore. These men might have friends. And we need to clear your name of this false accusation." She wanted to argue but knew he was right. "I'll only be gone a few days. We'll see." While Myles dug graves on a small rise behind the cabin, Tessa gathered essential supplies and secured the prisoner in the back of her father's old wagon. The man who had finally revealed his name as Frank Dawson watched her with undisguised hatred. "You'll hang for killing my brothers," he spat as she checked his bonds. "They tried to kill us based on a lie," Tessa replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "The law will see that." Dawson's laugh was ugly. "Law, out here. The law is whoever has the fastest gun or the most money." Tessa turned away, unwilling to show how deeply his words disturbed her. She knew the frontier justice system was imperfect at best, corrupt at worst. Would anyone believe her story over that of a bounty hunter claiming to bring in a wanted criminal? By mid-morning, they were ready to depart. Myles, his side rebandaged but clearly causing him pain, drove the wagon with Dawson secured in the back. Tessa rode alongside on her mare, leading Myles's chestnut stallion. She looked back at her cabin one last time, wondering if she would ever see it again. The journey to Florissant would take most of the day. They traveled in relative silence, the weight of recent events and uncertain future hanging between them. Occasionally, Dawson would call out insults or threats, but they ignored him. Around noon, they stopped by a stream to water the horses and rest. While Myles kept watch over their prisoner, Tessa prepared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. "What will happen when we reach town?" she asked, handing Myles his portion. "We'll speak to Sheriff Harrison. I know him, he's a good man. We'll explain what happened, show him the false wanted poster and sort this out." "And if he doesn't believe us," Myles met her eyes. "He will. And if he doesn't, I'll wire Judge Carlson in Denver. He knows me and my reputation." Tessa nodded, though doubt still gnawed at her. "And after? What then?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. What happened after this ordeal was resolved? Would Myles continue his hunt for Knox? Would she return to her isolated existence? "One problem at a time," Myles said finally, though his eyes held a promise that suggested he'd been considering the same questions. They resumed their journey, the terrain growing less steep as they approached the small settlement of Florissant. By late afternoon, the scattered buildings came into view: a main street with a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and small hotel. The sheriff's office stood at the far end, a simple wood frame building with a small jail attached. Their arrival drew curious stares from townsfolk. It wasn't every day a woman rode in escorting a wagon containing an armed man and a bound prisoner. Several men approached as they pulled up in front of the sheriff's office. "Marshal Sinclair," one asked in disbelief. "Thought you was dead." "Jasper Knox been bragging all over that he put a bullet in you." Myles stiffened. "Knox is here, in Florissant?" "Was. Left 2 days ago heading south. Said something about New Mexico territory." Sheriff Harrison emerged from his office, a tall man with a silver mustache and weathered face. "Sinclair, by God, it is you." He strode forward, hand extended. "What in tarnation happened to you?" As briefly as possible, Myles explained the ambush by Knox, his rescue by Tessa, and the attack by the bounty hunters. He showed Harrison the false wanted poster for Teresa Parker. "This ain't official," Harrison said immediately, examining the paper. "No seal, wrong formatting. Someone made this to frame the lady or collect blood money." Relief washed over Tessa. At least the sheriff believed them about the poster. "What about him?" Harrison nodded toward Dawson. "Attempted murder, for starters," Myles said. "His brothers died in the attack." "Self-defense, clear as day," Harrison agreed. "I'll hold him for the circuit judge. Miss Pearson, you'll need to give a formal statement." As they moved toward the office, a commotion erupted from the saloon across the street. A burly man staggered out, pointing directly at them. "That's her," he shouted. "That's Teresa Parker, the one who killed my cousin in Denver." Several more men emerged from the saloon, all looking hostile. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Inside now," Harrison ordered, ushering Tessa and Myles into the sheriff's office while drawing his pistol. "Lock the door." Through the window, they watched as Harrison faced down the growing crowd, his voice carrying clearly. "This woman is under my protection until her identity is confirmed. Anyone taking the law into their own hands will answer to me." The crowd muttered but didn't disperse. Harrison returned inside, looking grim. "We've got a problem," he said. "That's Bart Wesley out there. His cousin really was killed by a woman named Teresa in Denver. He's convinced you're her." He looked at Tessa apologetically. "Mob justice is brewing, and I don't have enough deputies to hold them off if they decide to storm the jail." Myles's face hardened. "Send a wire to Judge Carlson in Denver. He can confirm Tessa's identity and that she's never been to the city." "Telegraph lines down from the storm," Harrison said. "Won't be fixed till tomorrow at the earliest." "Then we need to get Tessa out of town until this can be resolved," Myles said decisively. Harrison nodded. "There's a back door through the jail. I can create a distraction while you slip out. Take my horse, he's in the rear stables." "Where should we go?" Tessa asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the fear churning inside her. "The old Peterson cabin," Harrison suggested. "Up in the foothills, about 15 miles west. No one's lived there since the old man died last winter. You'll be safe there until I can get this sorted out." Myles turned to Tessa. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but it's fine," she interrupted. "I trust you." The simple declaration seemed to fortify him. He checked his revolver, then nodded to Harrison. "We're ready when you are, Sheriff." Harrison grabbed a shotgun from the rack on the wall. "Give me 2 minutes to get their attention, then go. And Sinclair," he paused, his expression grave, "take care of her." "With my life," Myles promised. Harrison strode out the front door, shotgun raised. As predicted, the crowd's attention focused entirely on the sheriff and his booming demands for order. Myles and Tessa slipped out the back door of the jail, hurrying to the stables where they found Harrison's sturdy bay gelding already saddled. Within minutes, they were riding hard out of town, using the cover of trees to shield their escape. Tessa clung to Myles, her arms wrapped around his waist, the solid warmth of him providing her only comfort in the chaos their lives had become. They rode until dusk, pushing the horses as much as they dared. The Peterson cabin proved to be a small but sturdy structure nestled in a stand of pines, with a clear view of the valley below and the approach trail. Inside, they found basic furnishings covered in dust but intact: a table, chairs, a bed, and a fireplace. "It'll do for now," Myles said, securing the door while Tessa lit the lamp she'd found on a shelf. "How long do you think we'll need to stay?" she asked, brushing dust from the table. "A few days at most. Once the telegraph is working again, Harrison can clear your name." Tessa nodded, trying to maintain her composure, but the events of the past 24 hours suddenly overwhelmed her. Her legs buckled and she sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face. Myles was beside her instantly, kneeling despite the pain it must have caused his wound. "Tessa, look at me." His hands gently framed her face. "You're safe. I won't let anything happen to you." She looked into his eyes, seeing the fierce determination there and something else, something that made her breath catch. "I killed a man," she whispered. "I never thought I'd." "To protect me," he reminded her. "You saved my life, Tessa, for the second time." Their faces were inches apart, his hands still cradling her cheeks. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken feelings that had been building since that first night by the fire. "Why did you stay?" she asked suddenly. "You could have left days ago. Your wound was healing. You could have continued hunting Knox." "You know why," he said softly. And she did. She saw it in his eyes, felt it in the gentle brush of his thumb across her cheek, sensed it in the way he said her name like a prayer. Tessa leaned forward, closing the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened as years of loneliness and loss gave way to newfound hope. His arms encircled her, drawing her close, and for a moment, the danger they faced faded away. When they finally parted, both breathless, Myles rested his forehead against hers. "I should have done that days ago." "Yes," Tessa agreed with a small smile, "you should have." Their moment of peace was shattered by the sound of approaching horses. Myles was on his feet instantly, drawing his revolver and moving to the window. "3 riders," he reported, his voice tense. "Coming fast." Tessa's heart raced as she joined him at the window. "Can you see who it is?" "Not yet, but they know where they're going, heading straight for the cabin." She retrieved her pistol from her saddlebag. "What do we do?" "Wait, could be Harrison with news." But his tone suggested he didn't believe that. As the riders drew closer, moonlight illuminated their faces. Myles cursed under his breath. "Wesley and 2 others from the saloon," he said. "They must have followed our trail." "How? We were careful." "Wesley was a scout in the war, known for tracking." Myles moved to the door, securing it with a heavy wooden bar. "We need to hold them off until morning. Harrison will realize what's happened and send help." The riders stopped about 50 yards from the cabin. Wesley's voice carried clearly in the night air. "We know you're in there, Parker. Come out and face justice for what you did to Jimmy." "I'm not Teresa Parker," Tessa called back. "This is a mistake, like hell it is," Wesley shouted. "Jimmy described you perfect before he died. Said you had honey-colored hair and eyes like whiskey. Said you shot him when he caught you stealing from the mercantile." "I've never been to Denver," Tessa insisted. "Sheriff Harrison is confirming my identity." "Harrison's a fool who lets killers hide behind badges and pretty faces." Myles stepped forward. "Wesley, I'm Deputy Marshal Sinclair. You're interfering with a federal investigation. Return to town now and I'll forget this happened." Wesley laughed, a harsh sound in the darkness. "Your badge don't mean shit out here, Sinclair, especially when you're harboring a murderer." One of the other men spoke up. "Just give us the woman, Marshal. No need for you to die too." "Not happening," Myles replied coldly. "Leave now or I start shooting." The men conferred briefly, then Wesley called out again. "We'll be back at dawn, with more men. Think about which side of this you want to be on, Marshal." The sound of retreating hoofbeats confirmed they were leaving for now. "They're bluffing," Myles said, though his expression was grim. "Wesley can't gather a posse without Harrison's approval." "But he can gather friends," Tessa pointed out. "And from the look of things in town, he has plenty who believe his version of events." Myles couldn't deny the truth of this. "We need to prepare." They spent the next hours fortifying the cabin as best they could, moving furniture to block windows, gathering water from the nearby spring, checking and rechecking their limited ammunition. All the while, the tension between them simmered, their brief moment of connection both a comfort and a distraction. As they worked, Tessa told Myles about her life before, how her father had taught her to be self-sufficient, how she dreamed of someday opening a small school in Florissant, how the isolation had been both a blessing and a curse. Myles, in turn, shared more about his wife and son, speaking their names without the pain that had previously accompanied his memories. He told her about his life as a marshal, the good he'd tried to do, and his growing weariness with the violence that seemed to follow him. "After Knox," he said as they sat by the fire, weapons close at hand, "I think I'm done with the badge." "What will you do instead?" Tessa asked. Myles looked at her, his gaze steady. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about the kind of life I want." The implication hung between them, full of possibility. "And what kind of life is that?" she asked softly. "One with purpose, with peace." His hand found hers. "With someone to share it with." Tessa's heart raced. "Myles." "I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "We barely know each other. But I feel like I've known you forever, Tessa. Being with you these past weeks, it's the first time I've felt alive since I lost Sarah and Thomas." Tears welled in Tessa's eyes. "I feel it too." He leaned in, kissing her again, this time with a promise of future rather than fear of the present. When they parted, he whispered, "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember that." They took turns keeping watch through the night, but dawn arrived without incident. As sunlight spilled across the valley, Myles scanned the approach trail with growing unease. "Still clear," he reported. Maybe they thought better of it. Tessa wasn't convinced. Or maybe they're approaching from another direction. Her instincts proved correct. The first shot came from the ridge above the cabin, shattering a window and embedding in the far wall. Myles pulled Tessa to the floor as more shots followed. "They're on the high ground," he said grimly. "At least 3 shooters. How did they get up there without us seeing? Must have circled around in the night. Wesley knows these mountains." They crawled to positions by different windows, returning fire when possible, though their attackers were well concealed among the rocks and trees of the ridge. "We can't stay here," Myles decided after another volley of shots splintered the door. "They'll just wear us down. Where can we go?" "They have us surrounded." Myles considered their options. "There's a small cave about half a mile east. I noticed it when we rode in. If we can reach it, we'd have better cover and only one direction to defend." "How do we get there with them watching?" "Smoke," Myles said, moving to the fireplace. "We build up the fire, create enough smoke to cover our escape out the back." It was risky, but they had few alternatives. Working quickly, they piled damp wood and leaves on the fire, creating thick smoke that soon filled the cabin and began pouring out the broken windows and bullet holes in the walls. Outside, they heard confused shouts as the attackers tried to determine if the cabin was truly on fire. Using the distraction, Myles and Tessa slipped out the back door, staying low and using the trees for cover as they made their way east. They had almost reached the cave when a shot rang out, and Myles stumbled. Tessa turned to see blood blossoming on his shoulder. "Go," he urged her, raising his revolver to fire at a figure emerging from the trees. "Get to the cave." "Not without you," Tessa insisted, helping him to his feet. Together, they staggered the remaining distance to the cave, a shallow recess in the rocky hillside, but deep enough to provide cover. Inside, Tessa tore strips from her petticoat to bind Myles's new wound. "How bad?" he asked through gritted teeth. "Clean through. Missed anything vital, I think." Her hands worked steadily despite her fear. "But you've lost blood." Myles leaned back against the cave wall, his face pale. "They'll be coming." As if to confirm his words, they heard voices approaching, Wesley's among them. "They're in there. I saw them go in." Tessa checked her pistol, 3 bullets left. Myles had 2 in his revolver, 5 shots against at least 5 men. "Tessa," Myles said softly, taking her hand. "If this goes badly, it won't," she interrupted fiercely. "We're going to make it through this." Wesley's voice called from outside the cave. "Last chance, Parker. Come out now or we start shooting." Tessa looked at Myles, determination in her eyes. "My name is Tessa Pearson," she called back, "and I'm not coming out." "Then you'll die in there," Wesley responded. "Both of you." The first shots peppered the cave entrance, forcing them deeper into the recess. Myles returned fire, his aim still true despite his injuries. A cry of pain told them he'd hit someone. 2 bullets left, he muttered. Tessa fired once, twice, driving back another attacker who tried to rush the entrance. 1 left. They looked at each other, the reality of their situation sinking in. Without words, Myles pulled her close for what might be their final embrace. "No regrets," he whispered against her hair. "No regrets," she agreed. The sound of more gunfire erupted outside, but strangely, none of the shots seemed directed at the cave. Instead, they heard shouts of surprise and panic among their attackers. "What's happening?" Tessa wondered. Myles peered cautiously toward the entrance. "Someone else is out there." The shooting continued for another minute, then fell silent. A voice not Wesley's called out, "Marshal Sinclair." "Miss Pearson, it's Sheriff Harrison. You can come out now." Still cautious, they emerged to find Harrison and several deputies standing over Wesley and his men, all either wounded or in custody. "Sorry it took so long," Harrison said, approaching them. "Telegraph line got fixed sooner than expected. Judge Carlson confirmed your identity, Miss Pearson, and that the real Teresa Parker was arrested in Santa Fe 2 weeks ago." Relief washed over Tessa like a wave. "So it's over. For you, yes." Harrison looked at Wesley, who glared back defiantly despite the bullet wound in his leg. "This one's headed for prison. Attempted murder of a federal marshal carries a heavy sentence." Myles swayed slightly, the blood loss from his multiple wounds finally taking its toll. 2 deputies rushed forward to support him. "Get him to Doc Weber in town," Harrison ordered. "Miss Pearson, you should come too." The ride back to Florissant passed in a blur for Tessa. She refused to leave Myles's side as the doctor treated his wounds, both old and new. "He's lost a lot of blood," Doc Weber told her, "but he's strong. With proper rest, he should recover fully." "I'll make sure he rests," Tessa promised. For 3 days, Myles drifted in and out of consciousness in a room above the doctor's office. Tessa rarely left his bedside, speaking softly to him during his lucid moments, wiping his brow when fever set in, holding his hand through the worst of the pain. On the 4th morning, she awoke in the chair beside his bed to find him watching her, his blue eyes clear and alert, a scene reminiscent of their time in her cabin, but with their roles reversed. "This seems familiar," he said, his voice weak but steady. "I said I'd watch till you wake," she replied with a smile, echoing her words from weeks ago. "And here you are." He reached for her hand. "Thank you, Tessa, for everything." "I should be thanking you. You risked your life to protect me, and I'd do it again." His expression grew serious. "I meant what I said in the cabin, about the life I want." Tessa's heart quickened. "I meant what I said too." "Good." A smile tugged at his lips. "Because I have plans once I'm back on my feet." "What kind of plans?" "First, finding Knox and bringing him to justice." "I need to finish what I started." Tessa nodded, understanding his need for closure. "And then," he said, his eyes never leaving hers, "I thought I might build a house on a piece of land with a good view of the mountains, maybe start a small ranch." "That sounds nice," Tessa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where would this house be?" "I was thinking near Florissant. I hear there's a lady there who dreams of starting a school." Tears of happiness welled in Tessa's eyes. "Myles Sinclair, are you proposing to me?" "Not yet," he said with a grin. "When I do, it'll be proper on one knee with a ring. But yes, Tessa Pearson, I am declaring my intentions." She leaned down, kissing him softly. "Then I accept your declaration, Marshal Sinclair." News traveled fast in a small town like Florissant. By the time Myles was strong enough to leave the doctor's office 2 weeks later, everyone knew about the marshal and the homesteader's daughter. Some whispered it was too soon, that they barely knew each other. Others, who had witnessed their ordeal, understood that some bonds forged in fire became unbreakable. Sheriff Harrison provided them with an escort back to Tessa's cabin, which they found untouched, but in need of cleaning after their abrupt departure. Together, they set the small home to rights, repairing the damage from the bounty hunter's attack. As they sat on the porch that evening watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Myles took Tessa's hand. "I need to leave tomorrow," he said reluctantly. "Knox is still out there." Though she had expected this, the news still brought a pang of sadness. "How long will you be gone?" Hard to say. His trail leads toward New Mexico territory. Could be weeks. "I'll be here," Tessa promised. "Waiting." Myles reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object. "I want you to have this." He placed his deputy marshal's badge in her palm. The silver star caught the last rays of sunlight gleaming. "I can't take this," she protested. "It's your badge." "It's a promise," he corrected her, "that I'm coming back. That when this is over, I'm hanging it up for good." Tessa closed her fingers around the badge, understanding the significance of the gesture. "I'll keep it safe. Like you did me," he said softly, pulling her close for a kiss that held all the promise of their future. Myles departed at dawn, his chestnut stallion rested and ready for the long journey ahead. Tessa stood in the doorway of her cabin, the badge pinned inside her dress, close to her heart. "I love you," he called as he rode away, the first time he had spoken those words aloud. "I love you too," she replied, her voice carrying in the clear morning air. "Come back to me." "Count on it," he promised, tipping his hat before turning his horse toward the trail that would lead him to Knox and ultimately back to her. The weeks stretched into a month, then two. Tessa kept busy, tending her garden, repairing her cabin, and visiting Florissant occasionally for supplies. Each trip to town brought hopeful inquiries from townsfolk about news of Marshal Sinclair. Each time, she shook her head with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "He'll be back when his job is done," she would say, with more confidence than she sometimes felt. At night, she would touch the badge hidden beneath her pillow and whisper a prayer for his safety. Autumn painted the mountains in fiery hues of red and gold. Tessa harvested the last of her garden, preserving vegetables for the winter ahead. She split and stacked firewood until her arms ached, repaired the lean-to where Myles's horse had once sheltered, and reinforced her cabin against the coming cold. On a crisp October morning, as she hung laundry to dry in the brisk air, she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. Her heart leapt, then steadied as she reminded herself it could be anyone, a traveler, a neighbor, perhaps Sheriff Harrison checking on her as he occasionally did. But as the rider crested the rise, she recognized the chestnut stallion and the broad-shouldered man astride it. Myles Sinclair had returned, as promised. Tessa dropped the laundry basket and ran, not caring how it might look, her only thought to reach him. He dismounted in one fluid motion, catching her as she flew into his arms. "You're back," she breathed, scarcely believing he was real, solid, and warm against her. "I told you I would be," he said, his voice rough with emotion. She pulled back to look at him. He was thinner, his face more weathered, a new scar along his jawline. But his eyes, those blue eyes that had first opened to her by firelight, were the same, filled with love and something else. "Peace." "Knox?" she asked simply. "Facing justice in Santa Fe," Myles confirmed. "It's done." Relief and joy washed over her. "Then you're free." "I am." He took her hands in his. "Which brings me to something important." To Tessa's surprise, he lowered himself to one knee before her, wincing slightly as old wounds protested the movement. "I promise to do this properly," he said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a simple gold band. "Tessa Pearson, you saved my life in more ways than one. You brought light back into a world I thought would always be dark. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Tessa's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes," Myles Sinclair, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and rose to his feet, gathering her in his arms for a kiss that sealed their promise. That night, as they sat by the fire in her cabin, their cabin now, Tessa returned his badge. "You don't need this anymore," she said, placing it in his palm. Myles studied the silver star thoughtfully. "No, I don't." He tossed it into the fire, where it glowed briefly before the flames consumed it. "That chapter's closed." "What happens now?" Tessa asked, nestled against his side. "Now." He smiled, pulling her closer. "Now we build that house I talked about, start that school you've dreamed of, maybe raise a few horses, and children if we're blessed." "That sounds perfect," Tessa murmured. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Florissant. Sheriff Harrison stood as Myles's best man, while Mrs. Wilson, Tessa's nearest neighbor, served as matron of honor. The entire town turned out, the earlier suspicions and hostility replaced by genuine goodwill for the couple who had endured so much. Winter settled over the Colorado mountains, blanketing their cabin in snow. They spent the long evenings planning their future, a larger home to be built in the spring, land to be purchased, a life to be shared. By the time the first crocuses pushed through the melting snow, Tessa had news of her own to share. "Myles," she said one morning as they sat at breakfast, "I think we'll need to add another room to those house plans." He looked up, puzzled for a moment, then understanding dawned in his eyes. "Are you saying?" She nodded, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. "Come autumn, there will be 3 of us." Joy unlike any he had known since the birth of his son washed over Myles's face. He moved to kneel beside her chair, pressing a gentle hand over hers. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "for giving me a second chance at life, at love, at family." "We gave each other that chance," Tessa corrected softly, leaning down to kiss him. As spring blossomed into summer, their new home took shape on a rise overlooking the valley, with a clear view of both the mountains and the growing town of Florissant. Larger than Tessa's original cabin, it featured rooms for their expanding family, a proper kitchen, and a small attached building that would serve as the school Tessa had always dreamed of starting. The townsfolk, witnessing their happiness, often remarked on the unlikely circumstances of their meeting. "Imagine if you hadn't found him that day," Mrs. Wilson once said to Tessa, "if you hadn't nursed him back to health." "I can't imagine it," Tessa replied honestly, watching as Myles worked on the corral for their small but growing herd of horses. "It feels like we were always meant to find each other." Their daughter, Sarah Elizabeth Sinclair, was born on a clear October morning, with hair as dark as her father's and eyes that promised to be as warm as her mother's. As Myles held his newborn daughter, tears glistening in his eyes, he whispered a promise to her, the same one he had made to Tessa that first night by the fire. "I'll watch till you wake," he said softly, "and every moment after." Tessa, exhausted but radiant, smiled at the tableau they created, her husband, her child, her family restored from the ashes of loss and forged in the fires of adversity. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that some wounds, no matter how deep, could heal. Some hearts, no matter how broken, could love again. And sometimes, the most beautiful beginnings arose from the most unlikely circumstances: a wounded cowboy, a compassionate woman, and the promise made beside a flickering fire on a star-filled Colorado night. Years passed, their family grew, and the legend of Marshal Sinclair and his bride became part of Florissant's local lore, a tale of courage, redemption, and a love that began with 5 simple words spoken in the glow of firelight. "I'll watch till you wake."